Gonzaga went 1 of 15 from three, made 5 free throws, and got out-rebounded by 15, yet they never trailed in a gutsy win over the Gaels to win the WCC Championship on Tuesday.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Folks, Gonzaga is your WCC champion. They win the West Coast Conference Tournament, earn an automatic bid into the NCAA Tournament after a 58-51 win over the Gaels on Tuesday night. It was not pretty. If you missed this game and you looked at the box score, you already know it was not pretty. We're going to talk about that. We're going to break down how the Zags got it done, what it means for the NCAA tournament picture. We'll talk a little bit seeding, bracketology at the end of the show as well. But first, let's just celebrate. What an incredible, gutsy, challenging rivalry win the Zags just got at the Orleans Arena on Tuesday night. 58-51, the final score in this one, like we said. We're going to talk the good, the bad. We're going to talk about the keys to the game that we laid out on Tuesday's episode and kind of how those things shook out at the Orleans on Tuesday. First of all, the first note, Mark Few made a starting lineup change. And it was not the starting lineup change that he made the last time Gonzaga played St. Mary's, went on senior night. He inserted Joe Few into the starting lineup. Gaels went on an 11-0 run to start the game, and Gonzaga never recovered. That's not what happened in this situation. Mark Few opted to start the two big lineup. Braden Huff started in place of Ben Gregg alongside Graham Ike in the starting lineup. What a gutsy call to make a starting lineup change, and not even just a starting lineup change, but to play players together who don't play. I mean, Ike and Braden don't play minutes together very often. We've talked about that on the show. It's kind of, I mean, frankly, I think it's because they're both foul prone and you don't want to be in a situation where you have both those guys picking up early fouls. Graham Ike got a foul about 45 seconds into this game, so it kind of looked like that might be a risk that the Zags were willing to run with. I think the opportunity for Ismaila Diani was there if the foul trouble did kind of creep up for these two bigs, but it paid off really well. Gonzaga was in a zone defense, which I think mitigated some of those concerns potentially defensively in terms of picking up fouls for Gonzaga, and the size allowed them to not get beat too badly rebounding-wise. They ultimately still got out-rebounded pretty handily in this game, but Braden Huff was so incredible in this game, and this starting lineup change did what it was intended to do, which was put St. Mary's a little bit on their heels and put them in a spot where they had to adjust to Gonzaga so often when these two teams play each other. Randy Bennett and the Gaels impose their strategy, their pace, they dictate the game, and Gonzaga adjusts to them. In this game, because of the starting lineup change, because they started in a zone, the Gaels ultimately had to adjust to Gonzaga. And Gonzaga got out to a 20-7 start to this game. Culminated with Ben Gregg coming off the bench and throwing down a thunderous dunk on Mitchell Saxton. That ended up being the only bench point scored by Gonzaga in this game, which was not one of the better aspects of this contest. Like we said, lots of ugliness, but for Gonzaga to be able to establish what they wanted to do and force Randy Bennett and the Gaels to adjust to them, we don't see that very often. It's always a chess match between these two coaches, and Mark Few and the Zags made the first move, and it was a really good one. And I think that was a critical part of this game. The good stuff we already talked about in Braden Huff. Incredible performance. Arguably his best game of his career. He's had multiple 20-point games. I think from a game score perspective, he'll probably have had some games that were a little bit better than this. But considering the circumstance and considering his defensive impact in this game, this is the best game he's ever played. 18 points for him, 4 rebounds, 2 assists. He also had 2 steals and a block. He was 8 of 16 from the field. He was 1 of 4 from the three-point line, 1 of 1 from the free throw line. He made the only 3 in this game. We're going to talk about that in a second. 31 three-point attempts between these two teams. Braden Huff made 1. That is it. Braden Huff made more three-pointers than Nolan Hickman, than Ryan Nembhard, than every Gonzaga player, than everybody, the entire St. Mary's team. Marcelonis, Mikey Lewis, Jordan Ross, everybody. Braden Huff, 1-3 in the first half. That was it. Incredible game from Braden Huff. He not only played well offensively, got his looks, He was very, very good defensively on both Wessels and on both Wessels and Mitchell Saxon. He just bullied Paulus Morauskas, especially early in the second half. Morauskas, horrible game for him from St. Mary's. A key part of the reason Gonzaga was able to win this basketball game was that Morauskas did literally nothing. He had 4 fouls, 0 points for the Gaels. And it was because Braden Huff in that two big lineup, Morauskas was forced to guard him, and Huff just abused him. I don't think I've seen Braden Huff do this to anybody outside of the bye games that Gonzaga plays in the non-conference when they're playing the UMass Lowells of the world, the Nichols States, etc. For Braden Huff to do this against a player that has NBA aspirations in Morauskas, the newcomer of the year in the conference, a very good player lauded for his physicality and rebounding. I mean, Huff just abused him. I've never seen him do that to a player of that caliber, ever. Incredible stuff from Braden Huff in this game. The Zags only had 4 turnovers. We're staying with the good things. 4 turnovers. He only had 1 turnover in the first half, only 4 in this game. Incredible ball security. Missed a ton of shots in this basketball game. To have 58 points for a Gonzaga team with only 4 turnovers is crazy to see from the Zags. But if they'd coughed it up more, we might be talking about a different result, especially when you consider that the Gaels had 18. The Zags had a 14 or plus 14 in turnover margin in this game. The Gaels had 18 turnovers. 12 of them were steals by Gonzaga. The Zags had 20 points off turnovers, 10 fast break points. Many of those were both fast break points and points off turnovers. In the first half, we saw a lot of steals getting out in transition. Khalif Battle had a few transition opportunities. We mentioned the Ben Gregg dunk earlier in the game as well. The Zags, again, 12 steals. They also forced 2 shot clock violations, both in the final 6 minutes of this game. I don't think it was quite back-to-back possessions, but it was 2 out of 3 possessions ended in a shot clock violation. Just completely flummoxed St. Mary's. And it wasn't just that they forced a lot of turnovers and that they got steals and that they got out in transition. The defense was great, period, in this game. The Gaels shot 38.5% from the field. The Gaels shot 0 of 16 from 3. Sure, some of them were open looks that they missed, but a lot of them were contested. There was one possession where Nolan Hickman went for a steal, didn't get it, recovered on Marcelonis, kept him in front of him, forced him to take a ugly step back, 29-foot three-pointer, hit nothing but nothing, airballed that one. Just incredible defensive efforts from Hickman, from Emmanuel Innocenti, who had 3 fouls and didn't score off the bench, but was impactful defensively. Dusty Stromer in a limited role, impactful defensively. Khalif Battle was good defensively. Ryan Nembhard, they kind of shielded him because of foul trouble in the first half. We'll get to that in a second. But he had a very impactful game and was better than he typically is defensively as well. Just incredible stuff from the Zags perimeter defense. Mitchell Saxon and Augustus Marcelonis combined to score 32 points on 12 of 20 shooting. The rest of the team, every other St. Mary's player, not named Marcelonis or Saxon, had 19 combined points on 8 of 32 shooting. And folks, if you take out Luke Barrett, who had 9 points, you take him out, that means the entire rest of the team outside of those 3 guys had just 10 points on 4 of 25 shooting. Just an awful game from the bench depth, from the reserves for St. Mary's. We mentioned Morauskas, 0 points, 4 fouls. He was 0 of 7 in this game. Mikey Lewis, who got a whole bunch of praise from Sean Farnham and Dave Fleming during this game. They could not stop talking about Mikey Lewis. 5 points, 2 of 10 shooting, 0 of 7 from 3. Jordan Ross, 0 points, 0 of 5 shooting. Henry Wessels had 5 points, but he also had 5 turnovers. Gonzaga's defense was fantastic in this one. The not so good stuff, well, you shot 1 of 15 from 3. That's pretty terrible. But so is 5 of 7 from the free throw line. Some of this was officiating. It was a physical game. The Gaels got more free throw opportunities than Gonzaga. I always think if it's a physical game where there's blood on the floor and dudes battling it out, if you get to the end of the game and the other team is trying to foul you and they haven't gotten to the bonus yet, that probably means there weren't enough fouls called. I think that's a fair, reasonable thing to state about this game. I think there weren't enough fouls called on the Gaels. I think there's plenty of opportunities where EK or Huff or whomever should have gotten to the free throw line while also making shots at the rim. Alas, wasn't meant to be in this game. The other bad stuff for Gonzaga, 13-point lead in the first half, whittled all the way down to 2 at halftime because of an abhorrent decision by Ryan Nembhard. He picks up his second foul with about a minute left. Mark Few subs him out, brings Khalif Battle in with the sole reason for making that decision to not have Ryan Nembhard pick up a third foul before halftime. Ryan Nembhard chirps at the officials while on the bench, goes back to the bench after being warned by the officials, turns around, says one more thing to the officials, and gets teed up. Inexcusable. It's inexcusable. Your senior leader, a player who came into this game, during media press after the San Francisco game, or press before the San Francisco game, whenever it was, saying, I've never won anything. I've never won a conference tournament. This is so important to me. You cannot make that kind of mistake. I mean, it ultimately didn't matter. The Zags won this game. He played well in the second half, but that was a shockingly bad decision in a season where we've seen emotions get the best of players time and time again. To see Ryan Nembhard do that was very shocking. Again, the Zags picked themselves up and managed to find a way to get a W here, but that was really rough to watch. The bench had just 2 points for Gonzaga in this one. We mentioned that already. Ben Gregg had the dunk early in the game. That was it from the bench. No points from Ajayi, no other points from Gregg. But they only shot 1 of 4, so it's not like the bench was out there hacking up a bunch of shots. We saw good defense from Innocenti, decent defense from Ajayi, as Stromer as well. So it wasn't like they played horrible. It was a low-scoring game, but you'd like a little bit more impact from your 4 bench players. And then Graham Ike, tough night for him, 11 points, 7 boards. He was 5 of 12 shooting. He's been very, very good against St. Mary's throughout his career, or his 2 years here in Spokane. But it's not shocking that Mitchell Sack's one of the best defensive players in the country. Henry Wessels, who's very, very good on Ike. We saw that in the first game. We saw that a little bit in the second game as well. It was kind of bound to happen where Ike would have a bit of a tough night. So for Gonzaga to still find a way to get a W here on a night where Graham Ike was 5 of 12, had 4 fouls. I thought he played good defense. I thought his shot attempts for the most part were good, just had a few bunnies that didn't quite go down. But yeah, for Gonzaga to still find a way to win this game with that is extra impressive, quite frankly. Well, we knew a big game from Khalif Battle would be critical for the Zags to win this basketball game, and we got it. We're going to talk more about that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, taxes used to be waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now, taxes is matching with the TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can just focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is taxes. So get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only on iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Folks, get ready to bring your favorite Zags to life. VarsityIcons.com delivers the ultimate collection of action figures that honors both current and former Zags. Varsity Icons is the premier sports collectible figure for your Gonzaga Bulldogs. Today, we're going to highlight everybody's fan favorite, Ben Gregg. Varsity Icons was started by a longtime Gonzaga fan who wanted to create collectible figures of everybody's all-time favorite Zags. The mission of Varsity Icons is to create figures of current and former Zags for everybody to collect and enjoy. There's no question that Varsity Icons wanted to highlight Ben Gregg to be their first player. He has been a fan favorite since joining the Zags back in 2021. Ben exemplifies what it means to be a Gonzaga Bulldog every time he steps on the court. We are excited to make more of your favorite Zags in the future, so stay tuned and order your Varsity Icons Ben Gregg figure today at varsityicons.com. Varsity Icons, where icons live forever. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're still recapping this incredibly fun win for the Zags over the Gaels of St. Mary's to win the WCC Championship on Tuesday night. We're going to go through our 5 keys to victory. Some of them we kind of already touched on a little bit in the first segment. A few of them we haven't quite gotten to yet, so we're going to kind of talk about how those things went on Tuesday night, what it means for the Gonzaga, for Gonzaga, and then we'll close out the show talking about some bracketology. We haven't really seen any of the bracketologists update their bracket as I'm recording this about half an hour after the game ended, but we'll have much more on that on Thursday's episode of Locked On Zags. First, though, key number 1 for the Zags was to stop dribble penetration. If you recall Gonzaga's first game against St. Mary's in Moraga, the Zags got absolutely gashed by St. Mary's offense because they were just simply driving into the paint. Gonzaga's defense was pinching in on the shooters, or on the driver, Marcelonis or whoever was kicking it out to three-point shooters, and they were drilling threes. Well, we already know that St. Mary's did not make a single three-point shot in this game, and part of it was because Gonzaga was very effectively able to neutralize their dribble penetration. The Zags started this game out in a zone defense. And then when Mikey Lewis came into the game, they switched to a man defense. And throughout the game, they pretty much, from that point forward, stayed in that man defense. I was a little surprised. I thought the zone worked really well. They got out to that huge lead, but they kind of were pretty stuck with that man defense for the rest of the game. But the Gaels could not get anything going in terms of drive and dish, just was not an option for them. They ended up settling for just doing a lot of entry passes. Mitchell Saxon had a very good offensive game. And there was times when it was because of, Marcelonis had one possession where he had a great pass that zipped to Saxon for an easy bucket around the rim. But for the most part, the Gaels weren't able to make things happen off the dribble the way that they were, particularly in the first half of the first game. But even at times in the second half of that game and in Spokane, they were more effective in that area than they were in this game. And that's a huge credit to Nolan Hickman's defensive efforts, to Emmanuel Innocenti and Dusty Stromer off the bench, to Khalif Battle and Ryan Nembhard in the starting lineup. Those guys worked relentlessly hard. And I think it's always important when players maybe don't have a big offensive impact, like, again, Innocenti and Stromer did not score in this game. Hickman didn't have a great offensive game. When they're working their tails off defensively against a team that takes 27 out of 30 seconds every single time, you kind of have to forgive them a little bit for not being as impactful offensively. It's just part of the deal. Gonzaga, when they're asking certain players to play to fight through screens every single possession, and that's just kind of the role that they're filling, it's hard to do that to kind of be super engaged on both ends of the floor. So I think that was a factor in this game. It's part of the reason that St. Mary's is able to grind teams down so much, is because of how much effort you have to put in defensively. But, the Gaels were 20 of 36 on 2-pointers in this game. It was pretty effective in that area, but it mostly came from Saxon and Barrett. The outside shooting was completely non-existent. And again, I think the Zags just had really effective on-ball defense to eliminate that penetration and the kick out and the opportunities that the Gaels found much easier in the first two matchups. Key number 2 for Gonzaga was to crash the glass, and the Zags did not win the rebounding battle. In fact, they got smoked. 15 was the rebounding advantage for the Gaels, 43-28. The Gaels had 14 offensive rebounds. The Zags had 10, so it was actually fairly close in terms of offensive rebounds. And while St. Mary's had a big advantage on the glass overall, the Zags got them when they needed to. And the Gaels only had 11 second chance points, 14 offensive rebounds, but only 11 second chance points. Not a very efficient performance from the Gaels offensively in a lot of ways, but certainly not taking advantage of getting those offensive rebounds. The Zags only had 6 second chance points on 10 offensive rebounds as well. Again, neither team shot the ball all that well, so it shouldn't be shocking that we didn't see these teams capitalize there. But when Gonzaga needed them, they got them. Emmanuel Innocenti got an offensive rebound at about the 12-minute mark of the second half that led to a bucket from Ryan Nembhard. And then Braden Huff got an offensive rebound and a bucket late in the second half. That was a killer. It was like 2 minutes left. Really important possession. Huff got that rebound, got a score. Those are the kind of things that are just really deflating. I mean, we saw Luke Barrett had a possession where he had 3 offensive rebounds in the game in Moraga, and that killed Gonzaga. So we know that those late, giving up an offensive rebound late in a game is just really critical. And in this game, Gonzaga was the one who got those rebounds when they really needed them. Key number 3 was a big Khalif Battle game. We didn't talk about Battle much in the first segment because we had him circled as, hey, he's a big X factor. I think I put it as simply as, if Khalif Battle has a good game, the Zags will win. If he has a bad game, they won't. I know that feels reductive at times, but Khalif Battle is that important to this team because the spread between his good games and his bad games at times is incredibly wild. And this was definitely a good game. 14 points, so we didn't get up to that 20-point mark that we like to see from him. But again, in a game where the Zags scored 58, you'll certainly take 14 points from him. He also had 5 steals, averages 1 steal per game, got 5 of them in this one. He also had 3 assists and a pair of boards. He was 6 of 10 on 2-point attempts. He was 0-4 from 3, but he was 2 of 3 from the free throw line. Battle had 6 points in the first half and looked on pace to do much more damage in the first half because all 6 of his points came in the first 10 minutes of this game. But unfortunately, he picked up his second foul with about 10-ish minutes to go in the first half, sat for almost the rest of the half, came in with the final minute when Nembhard went to the bench. But then he had a much better second half, or a similarly effective second half with 8 points there. A lot of his damage was done in transition. That makes sense when you factor in that he had 5 steals. He was able to get out in transition. He had some chances where he could have scored more. He could have scored 20 easily in this game. A few transition opportunities that he blew. He just didn't get the shots to go down. Some mid-range jumpers that looked good, just didn't quite go down. Obviously, 0-4 from him is uncharacteristic as well. But for him to have been so impactful in this game defensively was crucial. I mean, he read the passing lanes extremely well. A lot of steals on just straight up stealing passes, just intercepting passes and getting out in transition. He had a couple where he came down on the big man and knocked the ball loose. I think Luke Barrett and Wetzel's combined probably did that 6 or 7 times in this game, where a guard, whether it was Battle or Innocenti or somebody, came down, knocked the ball loose and got it out in transition that way. So for Battle to have had that kind of, he also had some great passes. Some really, really good. He had a great pass to Graham Ike where he passed up a 3-point shot, drove in the lane. I thought when he caught the ball, I thought he was shooting a 3. He pump faked, dribbled. He took 2 dribbles. I thought he was pulling up for a little mid-range jumper. I think he thought he was too. He started to, and then he kicked it to Graham, who was cutting to the rim for a wide open shot. That's beautiful recognition, beautiful just floor vision from Khalif Battle to make that pass, to make that read. Just fantastic stuff from him in this game. Key number 4 was hit outside shots. Nope. Didn't do that. We know that. I think the best thing I can say about the outside shooting is that Gonzaga took 10 of them in the first half and only took 5 in the second half. They smartly said, you know what? The shots are not falling today. Let's not take them. 2 of those 5 in the second half were by Ben Gregg. Both of them were good looks. They were shots he should have taken. He just didn't make either of them. That's it. The outside shooting was a complete atrocity in this game between both teams combined, but Gonzaga didn't fall victim to becoming overly reliant on shooting the 3, and I think that was a huge part of the reason they were able to win this basketball game. And then key number 5 was to don't beat yourself. We've talked about emotions getting too heightened in these kinds of games, and we've seen Gonzaga crumble down the stretch time and time again against West Virginia, against UCLA, against UConn. The list goes on and on and on. And the most notable thing in this category for Gonzaga was, of course, the completely unnecessary technical foul by Ryan Nembhard late in the first half, when Gonzaga was crumbling, by the way. They were up 13. The lead had gotten whittled all the way down to 4. Nembhard chirps at a referee, gets a tech. Marcelonis hits both free throws to whittle it down to 2. Thankfully, St. Mary's was not able to capitalize and score in that on that possession, which allowed Gonzaga to go into halftime with the lead. But the Zags, when it mattered in the end of this game, they got it done. They hit the shots when they needed to. They got the offensive rebounds. More importantly than anything else, they got the stops. They got stop after stop after stop in the second half of this basketball game, allowed themselves to be in a position to win this game. And it was really nice to see Gonzaga in a season where closing out close games has just not been a reality for this team at all. To finally get it done in a critical matchup. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. What does it mean? That's the next question. What does it mean for Gonzaga? How critical was this? Because Gonzaga was going to make the NCAA tournament if they lost this game. But now the opportunity to move up in the seeding is pretty significant. And I'm going to talk about that and a few other things that could really help Gonzaga's resume between now and Selection Sunday, coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, are you looking to optimize your nutrition this year? Factor makes eating well easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh and never frozen and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. With 40 options across 8 dietary preferences every week, you can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle, whether it's Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto. And plus, with Factor, even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfast, and grab-and-go snacks to keep you fueled all day long. I love how Factor takes the stress out of meal planning, and without sacrificing taste, these meals are packed with flavor. The convenience is unbeatable. No prep, no mess, just great food in minutes. So eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 off and use code LockedOnCollege50 off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code LockedOnCollege50 off at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're closing out the show, talking a bit big picture about what this means for Gonzaga. First things first, the Zags are officially making the NCAA tournament. We've been talking about it for a while. The win over Santa Clara was, in my opinion, what cemented them as making the tournament. In my mind, they have been a lock to get a bid in the NCAA tournament since February 25th when they beat the Broncos of Santa Clara. After that, they beat San Francisco. A week later, they beat San Francisco again. Now they've beat St. Mary's, but more importantly, they've won the automatic bid from the WCC into the NCAA tournament. So there's now no debate. There's not even a 0.00% chance that Gonzaga will be left out of the field. They're going to make it. It's over. It's done. They're in. The streak continues. We know that with definitive 100% certainty. That's the most important thing. But outside of that, Gonzaga is now also 4-6 in quad one games. 3 of their 4 quad one wins have come since February 25th. the aforementioned Santa Clara road win, the San Francisco road win, and then, of course, now the St. Mary's neutral site win at the Orleans Arena. 4-6 in quad one games. And here's the deal. This is what I want to focus on right now. Baylor and Indiana, two of Gonzaga's best wins, two of the very few teams, a list that now includes St. Mary's and San Diego State, that Gonzaga has beat this year that are going to be most likely in the NCAA tournament. Now, both Baylor and Indiana and San Diego State, frankly, are in that bubble conversation, but pretty likely all these teams, or at least three of these four teams, are going to make the big dance. But Baylor and Indiana are also very close, where they only have to move up Baylor 1 spot, Indiana 2 spots. If either of them move up just that amount in the net rankings, the wins that Gonzaga has over them, which are currently quad 2 wins, would become quad 1 wins. Baylor plays Kansas State on Wednesday. Indiana plays Oregon on Thursday as the Big 12 and Big 10 tournaments get started, respectively. If Baylor beats Kansas State, who's coming off a win over Arizona State Tuesday night, if Baylor beats Kansas State, I think there's a pretty good chance they will move up, and they only need to move up 1 spot to 30 or 29 in the net rankings. If Baylor were to go on any kind of run outside of that, if they beat Kansas State and then they win their next game in the Big 12 tournament, they're very likely going to be in that top 30, which means Gonzaga will go from 4-6 to 5-6 in quad 1. Meanwhile, Indiana, 52nd in the net right now. If they're top 50, since that was a neutral site game, they would be a quad 1 win as well. Indiana has a better first-round opponent against Oregon. If Mike Woodson and the Hoosiers beat Dana Altman and the Ducks, I think they probably move up at least 2 spots, and that gets them into the top 50. That gets them into that quad 1 conversation. All this to say, right now, as we're recording this Tuesday night, there's 5 days until Selection Sunday. Gonzaga's 4-6 in quad 1 games. Would not shock me if by the time the actual selection committee sits down to put this whole thing together, if the Zags are 6-6 in quad 1 games. Think about that for a second. This Gonzaga team has struggled to close out games all year long, has struggled to beat NCAA tournament caliber teams. None of this has changed. That Gonzaga still lost to UConn and UCLA and West Virginia and every team that they lost to. Like, none of that has changed. But at the end of the year, the resume that gets put in front of the selection committee could realistically show Gonzaga as being 6-6 in quad 1 games, while also having just 2 quad 2 losses, 0 quad 3 losses, 0 quad 4 losses, and a top 10 position in the net ranking. Like, we know they're 8th in the net coming into Tuesday. I doubt they moved. The win over St. Mary's should help them, but when you're that high I don't think they're going to jump all the way to 7 or anything like that. But they're still going to be in the top 10 for sure. I mean, clearly they're going to be in the top 10. You're talking about a team that could be top 10 in the net with 6 quad 1 wins. I mean, at that point, it's really hard to imagine that this team is outside of, there's no way they're an 8-9 seed. There's just no way. There's no way they're in the 8-9 seed conversation. I would imagine that at that point, this team would be maybe a 6. I think bracketologists who adjust their brackets on a daily basis, again, as I'm recording this, Joe Lenardi, Jerry Palm, Mike DeCourcy, Lucas Harkins, Rocco Miller, the other bracketologists who I follow on a daily basis at this point, none of them have updated because I'm recording, again, about 20 minutes after the game ended between Gonzaga and St. Mary's. But they'll all be updated by tomorrow. By the time many of you are listening to this, they're probably already updated. It's what we're going to talk about on Thursday's show. I suspect a lot of the bracketologists will have Gonzaga as a 7 seed. I don't think too many of them will have bumped them all the way up to the 6. It's worth pointing out a couple of things. One, bracketologists are not always accurate. Joe Lenardi was like 95th in terms of accuracy amongst a bunch of people who submitted their brackets to the bracket matrix. So what the committee does is not necessarily going to be reflective of the bracketologists who we talk about on this show or on Locked On College Basketball, what they're projecting. Doesn't mean that they're wrong or bad at their jobs. It just means that the committee doesn't always, it just means that there's a lot of various ways to interpret this data. But looking at Gonzaga's resume, again, if Baylor and Indiana get to the quad 1, if Gonzaga ends up 4-6, they're still going to be 4-6 in quad 1 games. They're still going to be, that's not a bad record by any stretch. I think it's possible Gonzaga is in that. I still think they're a 7 seed minimum. But it does depend what happens in the SEC tournament, what happens in the Big 12 tournament, where there's some teams that are kind of floating in that conversation. Does West Virginia go on a run? Does BYU go on a run? Like, what does it mean? Like, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, some of those teams in the middle of the SEC that are kind of floating around that 8-9 territory as well. But if Gonzaga gets 2 more quad 1 wins by Baylor and Indiana getting W's, I cannot imagine they would be lower than a 7. I think a 7 would be a bit of a disservice with a 500 record in quad 1 games and a top 10 finish in the net. But I would be accepting of that. But I think that 8-9 danger, I don't want to say it's over. I don't want to say it's over by any stretch, but this is what Gonzaga needed to do to push themselves into a more comfortable territory. I think a 7 seed feels like the more likely outcome at this point, whereas a 6 seed, which felt like a bit of a distant, oh, maybe it's possible, feels a lot more possible now. All this to say, you're rooting for the Baylor Bears tonight, Wednesday night against Kansas State. You're rooting for the Indiana Hoosiers and former Zag Umar Ballo against the Oregon Ducks. Rooting hard for those 2 teams, because if Gonzaga can get a 500 record in quad 1 games and a top 10 finish in the net, there's no possible way that they're in that 8-9 conversation. There's just no way. A couple other quick notes here. Oregon State beat Portland in the WCC Championship on the women's side, so the Beavers will be dancing. Again, Gonzaga lost in a last-second fashion to Oregon State on Monday night. It was a tragic, tragic loss, the end of Yvonne Ejim's prolific college basketball career in Spokane with the Zags. Oregon State, an Elite 8 team last year, lost basically their entire roster, the transfer portal, after the move from the Pac-12 to the WCC. Had 8 quad 4 losses this year, was 131st in the net, yet when it mattered most, got a pair of W's in Las Vegas and will go dancing once again. Congrats to the Beavers. Really sad to see Gonzaga's season end the way that it did, however. And then Anton Watson made an NBA debut. Another Zag in the NBA. Watson, of course, drafted by the Boston Celtics, 54th overall in the 2024 NBA draft, was on a 2-way contract, spent the entire season with the Maine Celtics in the G League before getting waived a little over a week ago. He got claimed by New York, put on their bench, and made his debut in a loss to the Kings on Monday night. Played just 4 minutes, 0 of 3 from the field. He had an assist and a turnover, but doesn't matter. Anton Watson's an NBA player. The kid from Spokane, the legend from Gonzaga Prep, who spent 5 years grueling at Gonzaga, 4 years in a kind of reserve, smaller role, steps into a bigger offensive role as a senior, balls out, career season for him last year for the Zags. He's now officially in the record books as an NBA player. Huge congratulations to Anton. Just wanted to get a mention on that here because he's one of my favorite Zags of all time, one of many of your favorite Zags of all time. So very happy to see him get his chance in the association on Monday night. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on Locked On Zags. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day, and for hanging out with us throughout what was a topsy-turvy, up and down regular season for Gonzaga, but it ends once again with them in the NCAA tournament. We're going to talk about seeding. We're going to talk about projections for the next couple of days. And then, of course, once we get that big old bracket on Sunday, we'll get you ready for Gonzaga's matchups and what that's going to look like in the big dance. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And as always, go Zags.